The courtroom is often called a theater of justice, but sometimes it's just a cage where desperation battles cynicism. On this Tuesday afternoon in the Superior Court of Havenwood County, the stage was set for a minor procedural hearing, a simple motion to dismiss a civil suit. Nothing to see, nothing to make the evening news. The air was thick, stale, and silent, broken only by the hum of ancient air conditioning. A large clock on the wall crept toward the close of business. It was supposed to be an ordinary end to a long, tedious day, until a young man, barely out of law school, walked into that cage, holding a file that contained not just a case, but the last vestige of his family's hope. His name was Elias Vance, and he was here to dismantle a decades-old crime hidden beneath the veneer of corporate law. Elias was facing not just the opposition's seasoned counsel, but the towering figure of the bench, Judge Arthur Blackwood, a man whose reputation was built on merciless efficiency and a corrosive wit, a man who preferred speed over truth. Blackwood saw young lawyers like Elias as gnats, annoying, easily swatted, and certainly delaying his planned 6 o'clock tea time. The true battle was about to begin. The case at hand was a civil suit for wrongful termination, seemingly unremarkable. But the true, unseen conflict lay deep beneath the surface. Meet Elias Vance, 26 years old, demolitionman. That's what they called him, ironically, at the small, underfunded legal clinic where he volunteered. He was sharp, yes, but he lacked the political polish of the established bar. His suit, though clean, was a hand-me-down, and his tie was perpetually too tight, as if constricting his true purpose. His focus, however, was razor-sharp, driven by a private, consuming obsession. He carried himself with a brittle, exhausted quality, the result of sleepless nights spent poring over zoning maps instead of legal precedents. His antagonist on the bench was Judge Arthur Blackwood, 63, the Iron Gavel, a man defined by arrogance and the suffocating power of his position. He wore his judicial robe like a heavy, protective cloak, signaling his authority. His profound impatience with anything that didn't immediately lead to a conclusion was notorious. The slightest deviation from procedure brought a loud, dismissive sigh. The defendant was Sterling Development, represented by Mr. Harrison Wells, a colossal construction firm known for its cutthroat land deals and its equally ruthless legal department. Wells, the opposing counsel, exuded an obnoxious, tailored confidence, knowing his firm was powerful enough to bury 1,000 small claims like this one simply through superior resources. The plaintiff, Ms. Clara Mendez, a single mother claiming she was fired for refusing to sign off on faulty construction permits for a large Sterling Development project, a new luxury condo complex. This was the surface-level conflict, but Elias wasn't here for Ms. Mendez's paycheck. He was here for something Sterling Development had buried decades ago, something tied to the land where their new luxury complex was being built. The disappearance of his sister, Sarah Vance, 18 years prior. Sarah was last seen near the old, abandoned quarry lot, the very parcel of land Sterling Development had acquired a mere 6 months ago, the same land they were now rushing to build upon. This wasn't a civil suit for Elias. This was an 18-year-old manhunt disguised as a motion hearing. Elias's immediate objective was simple: obtain a temporary injunction to halt construction on the Sterling site. He argued that his client's case required a full forensic examination of the structural materials, a necessary delay, he claimed, to verify the deep corruption allegations. But the real goal was time to get investigators onto the site before the potential evidence of his sister's disappearance was paved over. He stood before the bench, his voice initially tight, then gaining a measured strength. "Your Honor," he said, meticulously formal, "the plaintiff requests a full forensic inspection of the construction site. The alleged faulty materials are not just a matter of civil fraud, but a significant public safety risk that requires immediate judicial intervention." He carefully chose the language of urgency, hoping to pierce the judge's apathy. Judge Blackwood leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking under his weight, a look of profound disbelief curdling on his face. He cut off Mr. Wells, the opposing counsel, with a dismissive wave of his hand. The judge's mockery was immediate and withering. "Forensic inspection," he boomed, his voice echoing with sarcasm. "For a wrongful termination case? Are we trying to find a bloodstain on a contract here, Mr. Vance? I've seen more public safety risk in my morning coffee. Are you suggesting we halt a $50 million construction project over a few bags of substandard cement? Or is this just a classic rookie delay tactic?" Opposing counsel Wells smirked openly, enjoying the spectacle of the young lawyer's public humiliation. Elias felt the familiar heat rise in his cheeks, but he held his ground. He knew this was the trap, to get him angry, to make him unprofessional. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the severity of the allegations regarding these structural permits warrants the inspection. This is not mere delay. This is due diligence to protect the citizens of Havenwood, who will eventually occupy this structure." But Blackwood had heard enough. His patience, already thin, snapped like dry wood. He slammed his hand lightly on the bench, not with the gavel, but with a gesture of ultimate boredom. "Mr. Vance, you are barely making sense. Your argument is tenuous, frankly absurd, and a direct affront to the efficiency of this court. Sterling Development has suffered enough in this frivolous pursuit. I am not going to entertain a fishing expedition that ties up a major economic driver for this county. Your motion for an injunction is denied. Now, file a simple discovery motion and stop wasting my time with this cinematic grandstanding." The denial was a punch to the gut. The clock was running out. Elias knew that construction would continue immediately, perhaps even tonight. Sarah's last known location would be irrevocably paved over by tomorrow morning. He had one shot left, one desperate, dangerous Hail Mary that would shatter the courtroom decorum and reveal his true, devastating purpose. The courtroom seemed to freeze. Elias did not sit down. He pushed his chair back with a loud, scraping sound that echoed through the marble hall. It was a disruption that commanded the judge's unwilling attention. Elias took a deep, shaky breath, his hands gripping the edges of the defense table. His voice changed, losing its formal, legal tone and becoming raw, personal, and profoundly sad. As Judge Blackwood was preparing to call the next case, Elias stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, his voice gaining volume. "Before you call the next case, there is something I must place on the record. Something that bears directly on my true intention here today." Blackwood sighed dramatically, rubbing his temples in an exaggerated show of annoyance. "Mr. Vance, your theatrics are wearing thin. If you have nothing more to say about the Mendez case, I suggest you—" Elias cut him off, the volume rising to a desperate plea that resonated off the marble walls. "It is not about Ms. Mendez's case. It is about case file 2005 to 447, missing persons. My sister, Sarah Vance." The scratching of the stenographer stopped abruptly. The courtroom fell into an absolute, deathly silence. 18 years ago, my sister, Sarah, Elias continued, his voice tight with controlled emotion, disappeared near the old Havenwood quarry. The same quarry that sits on the land Sterling Development purchased 6 months ago. The same land you just permitted them to cover with luxury condos. Elias's eyes were now locked on the judge, not with deference, but with a cold accusation. "I did not take on Ms. Mendez's case for a fee, Your Honor. I took it on because it gave me the legal standing to request discovery on that site. I needed a reason to get my hands on any documentation that might detail the composition of the earth, the history of the land, any old site plans, any documentation that could confirm what my gut has told me for nearly 2 decades. Judge Blackwood slowly lowered his hand, his face pale as he realized the true gravity of the situation. The civil proceeding was a Trojan horse. The reason I asked for a forensic inspection of the structural materials is not to find bad cement, Judge Blackwood. It is because I believe, based on years of independent investigation, that Sterling Development's rush to build and their history of cutting corners is less about profit and more about covering up what was already buried there. Elias reached into the manila folder and pulled out a single, laminated, oversized photograph. He didn't submit it to the clerk. He walked slowly, deliberately, around the defense table and laid it flat on the judge's bench. It was a picture of a teenage Sarah Vance, smiling brightly, standing next to a slightly younger, gap-toothed Elias. It was an image of pure, lost innocence. I know the law, Your Honor. I know you had every legal right to deny my motion based on the civil context. But before you bury my last chance under a mountain of frivolous procedural rules, I want you to look at my sister. And I want you to understand that every mocking word you have uttered today, every cynical dismissal of my efforts, has been directed at a brother who is standing in your courtroom for one final, desperate attempt to bring his sister home. The judge didn't touch the photo. He just stared at it. The arrogant mockery had vanished, replaced by a shock that held genuine, uncomfortable fear. The young, absurd lawyer was not trying to win a case. He was trying to find a grave. The revelation hung in air like gunpowder smoke. Elias's private quest had become public, judicial record. The power dynamic, which had been so clearly defined by the robes and the bench, had completely disintegrated. Wells, the opposing counsel, attempted to recover, sensing the catastrophic shift in the court's mood. His voice was a panicked hiss. Your Honor, this is outrageous. A complete sidebar. Personal appeal, irrelevant to the motion. I demand this be stricken from the record immediately. Judge Blackwood finally moved. He slowly reached out, not for his gavel, but for the microphone. His voice, when it came, was not booming, but a low, gravelly rasp. Silence, Mr. Wells. Not a word more. The judge looked at Elias, the weight of the moment pressing down on his 63 years. He recognized the look in the young man's eyes, a desperation he could not dismiss as mere legal maneuvering. He knew that if he simply dismissed this, he would carry the weight of Elias's sister on his conscience for the rest of his life. Mr. Vance, you have committed a serious ethical breach in this court today. You have manipulated a civil process for a private criminal inquiry. However, the judge hesitated, then slowly picked up his gavel. He looked at the photo of the smiling girl one last time, then hammered the gavel down with a sharp, resounding crack that startled everyone. However, the court cannot and will not ignore the possibility of a felony connected to the properties under its jurisdiction. Mr. Vance, while your motion for an injunction is still procedurally denied within the context of the Mendez case, this court hereby orders a 7-day, no-build stay on the Sterling development site, effective immediately. Wells jumped up, sputtering in protest, but the judge cut him off with a look of pure steel. The basis of the stay is a separate, emergency judicial order issued to the Havenwood Police Department and the County Sheriff's Office. Mr. Vance's testimony, though irregular, has established reasonable, highly personal suspicion connecting the development site to a long cold missing person case. The court will not allow further construction until a full, verifiable ground-penetrating radar survey is completed on the parcel. Let the record reflect. This is an order of the court. Failure to comply will result in contempt and forfeiture of all development rights. Elias looked at the judge. He didn't smile, but a single tear tracked a path through the exhaustion on his cheek. He simply nodded, the victory silent and painful. Elias Vance didn't win the termination case, but he had won the 7 days he desperately needed. The system, bent and flawed, had been forced to bend toward the truth. Within 72 hours, the mandated radar survey, conducted by an independent team under the sheriff's watch, delivered the devastating final answer. The earth had given up its secret. Near the perimeter of the quarry, just 40 feet from where the foundation for the new parking garage was planned, the survey detected a non-natural anomaly, a large, undisturbed displacement of earth. Sarah Vance's remains were recovered on the 4th day of the stay. Elias Vance never practiced civil law again. He joined the district attorney's office, focused solely on cold case prosecutions. His fight to find his sister became his life's purpose, forcing a powerful corporation to halt its progress and a cynical judge to confront his humanity. The case of Mendez versus Sterling Development was dismissed, but the case of the State v. The truth was finally opened and the evidence Elias uncovered led to the eventual arrest of a former foreman for the company that had managed the quarry site 18 years prior. Justice doesn't always wear a bright suit or argue eloquently for a paycheck. Sometimes it wears the worn clothes of a desperate brother, fighting not for a verdict, but for a memory. The judge, Arthur Blackwood, retired 6 months later. He never spoke publicly of the Vance case, but those who knew him said he never mocked a young lawyer again. The weight of that Tuesday afternoon in a mundane procedural hearing changed him forever. This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.